It is now my pleasure to turn today's program over to Ms. Tamara Berlano from Marsh Canada Limited. The floor.
Once again, it's Tamara from Marsh Canada. We are hosting the webinar for the CMA members. And today we have speakers from Ecclesiastical Insurance, who underwrites the property casualty for the CMA, and from XL Catlin, who insures and underwrites the fine arts collection piece. We'll begin the presentation with Ecclesiastical, and then we will move to XL for their presentation, and we will have it open for questions at the end of the conference. And speaking right now is Colin Robertson from Ecclesiastical. Colin?
Okay, thanks, Tamara. So I've been asked to talk about best practices for flood protection, prevention, mitigation, and then I'll turn it over to my colleague from XL, who will kind of focus more on collections and what have you. So just a quick introduction to Ecclesiastical. As Tamara said, we are the property casualty insurer, building contents but not the fine arts. Been around for just over 130 years, operating in Canada since 1972. Strong in, obviously, the faith space, but also the arts, culture, heritage, charity and not-for-profit space. So a little about Ecclesiastical. Just a bit of a side note for those of you that watched the Royal Wedding on Saturday. St. George's Chapel, Windsor is insured by Ecclesiastical, so we were the official insurer of the Royal Wedding. So there you go. Okay, still plug. Okay, next slide. So we're here to talk about flood, but flood's really an outcome of severe weather. And we live in a country where severe weather is really the norm and actually potentially is on the increase. Severe typically occurs where there's a clash between warm air and cold air. So as you can imagine, being in Canada, you have the Arctic flow and the warmest flow from the south, constant clashing, and therefore we do see significant weather on an annual basis. You know, for those of you, storms in Ontario in April, windstorms in Ontario in April and May, flooding in New Brunswick in April and May. So example weather include storm, both pluvial and fluvial flooding, and I'll explain what those terms mean in a minute. Tornado, winter storm, ice storm, wildfire. It's kind of litany of and we're not alone in this. You know, patterns seem to be changing around the world. Look at what happened in the hurricane season in 2017, where 3 Category 3+ storms made landfall in the U.S. There was wildfires in California, landslides, flooding in Europe. Louvre was put on notice in January from flood warning. So, you know, pain patterns are changing. It is severe and is unpredictable, more volatile and more frequent. And Jane will attest to that. My colleague Jane Williamson is VP Claims. We do see increase in the frequency and severity of weather-related events. And it's not just the old insurance companies that can complain about the weather. David Phillips, who's the senior climatologist at Environment Canada, weather is changing and we do need to adapt. He was quoted in a recent CBC article as saying, and I quote, "We have to recognize the climate is changing and that we have to do things differently, and people who do things differently will come out the winners." So, okay. So weather-related losses, particularly storm and water damage, are now the most frequent and costly cause of property damage loss in Canada and beyond. We've already talked about some of the events in 2017 and into 2018. To the next slide. Okay, so, you know, we talk about flood, so we will focus the rest of the presentation on flood. So when we talk about flood, there are actually different flooding. Flooding or fluvial flooding, coastal flooding, overflooding, and sewer backup. So with river flooding or fluvial flooding, this really occurs when a water course cannot cope with the water runoff that's draining into it from the surrounding land environment. It happened during a sustained period of heavy rainfall over an extended period, already waterlogged land. So in Canada, it can occur in the spring where heavy winter snowfall melts. Flooding. Coastal flooding results from a combination of high tides and storm conditions. Particularly atmospheric pressure is low, and that coincides with a high tide, then a tidal surge may happen. And I guess those of you on the line may remember Superstorm Sandy in whenever it was, 2012. So there was a significant storm surge associated with that particular storm. We a kind of post-tropical depression, but obviously low pressure, high tide, causing inundation. So and flooding. Now, overland flooding or surface water runoff. This is the term pluvial flooding. And this occurs when you have heavy rainfall, typically in a short period of time, but very intense, and that overwhelms the drainage capacity of the local area. The issue with land flooding is it's highly difficult to predict. River coastal flooding is easier to predict because you can look back over history and time and look at flood records, but runoff is extremely difficult to predict. It's unpredictable, it's very localized, and it's apparently indiscriminate in nature. The final comment we'll talk about is sewer backup. And backup occurs when sanitary sewers and storm drains become overwhelmed by heavy rainfall or they're already blocked. And the pressure then causes a backflow into buildings and facilities. Some reference. Full of examples in Canada. I'm sure everybody remembers the 2013 Alberta floods. We certainly do, Jane.
We definitely do.
It was in June the 20th. Really, we talked earlier, heavy rainfall in combination with a snow melt from heavy winter snowfall in the mountains. Flooding along several rivers, the Bow, the Elbow, and the Highwood. Unfortunately, people lost their lives in this event. At the time, 2013, it was the largest insured loss in Canadian history. Shortly overtaken by the Fort McMurray wildfire in 2016. Wildfire is also a severe weather event, but obviously not a flood-related event. Okay, so more recently, and I guess the reason for our discussion today is the flooding that occurred just recently in New Brunswick. Again, a combination of a heavy winter snowfall, spring thaw, warmer temperatures, and heavy rain caused water levels to rise rapidly along the St. John River, and it is causing severe flooding. So discussions today. Museums are not immune to this. The museum community is not immune to flooding and the potentially devastating consequences that can. So I guess we can give you the doomsday scenario, the doom and gloom bits and pieces. So is there anything we can do? Sometimes you kind of stand back and think, oh, this is a kind of natural catastrophe. You know, what can we do? Well, there are certain things that can be done in terms of flood risk management and flood mitigation. That's really about preparation, responding, and recover. I'm going to talk mainly about preparation and responding, and obviously colleagues from Excel may talk a little bit more about recovery in the second half of the presentation. Foremost, though, you need to be clear about the extent of the flood risk in your area and how susceptible or otherwise your facility is to flooding. Are you a risk area? And it's essential to know this before you can decide on how to manage the risk and the level of flood protection that you may or may not need. So you do carry out a risk assessment of your flood risk. And this takes account of two things. Firstly, it looks at the local topography. So is your facility near a river, a stream, a ditch? Are you built, has the building been constructed on a floodplain? Are you close to the sea? Are you in an area which is susceptible to storage, coastal flooding? How high is your building above the recognized floodplain? Are flood defences already in place, or are these scheduled to be put in place? So you look at the Red River Relief System in Manitoba for being an example of a flood relief system. The situation is really a history of flooding in your area. So when did it occur? occurred in the past, what was the cause of these floods, and how high did the flood waters rise, because that will give you an indication of the protection that you may or may not need to deploy, and also how fast the water rose. And so going ahead, taking some cost-effective precautions when necessary, then potentially there is the possibility to minimize and sometimes prevent the worst of the flood damage, and we'll kind of look at that as we go through. Okay. So, bit of action, more prepared is more resilient. So obviously preparation is key here. So, you know, I guess one of the favorite water cooler topics is the weather. We're all smiling in Toronto because summer's finally arrived and it's hot and sunny and it's nice. Everybody likes to talk about the weather. So I think it's important that we become with weather-related terminology, and therefore taking a more proactive approach to monitoring the weather. You know, look at the Weather Channel from time to time. And to listen out for watches and warnings and to know what those terms mean, because obviously there's watches and warnings that are issued by Environment Canada, and consider having these alerts sent to your smartphone. Okay. So a watch means that conditions are favorable for an event to occur. A warning actually means that the conditions are probably occurring. So it's important to be aware of those terminologies. So flooding is a potential problem for you and your facility. Then do develop a documented flood plan, and do communicate this to your staff, your employees, your volunteers, and to other key stakeholders as appropriate. Also, remember that the place to be accessible even if you can't access your facility. So, a good idea to copy off-site or somewhere where you can access the plan. It sounds pretty obvious when we're talking to a group of museums, but and I'm sure your curatorial teams already do this, but you do need to make sure you keep detailed record inventories of all collections, graphic records, and again store these records off-site so you can access them in the event of an incident. So you should consider flooding when you're building a new facility, you're renovating your property, you're making structural changes, you're redesigning your galleries, the flow of your building, and also you're thinking about allocating storage space for collections and archives that may be not on display. I know it's a great place to store stuff, so pretty prone to flood and sewer backup and all good water damage. So I just quickly talk about a very good example of a museum that was structured with flood in mind. So these pictures I took, I was there, I think back in 2015. This is the O'Day Museum, which opened back in 2016, and it is insured on the CMA program. It was designed with an eye on flood prevention. The 6,000 square foot building is located within the 100-year floodplain of the Fittons Creek, I guess it's a river, which through the ski resort of Whistler in the coastal mountain range of British Columbia. Innovative, it's designed like a bridge actually. It's quite innovative to would flow under the bridge, not through it. So it's the innovative bridge-like design elevates the building into the surrounding tree line. You can kind of see that a little bit in the picture bottom left. And the thing was designed actually to stand above the calculated 1 in 2,500 year flood return period. So that's pretty cautious, which is a good thing. Mm-hmm. But for good reason, given the importance and the value of the collection that the gallery houses. So I'm sure our cocktail are happy about that. Okay. When thinking about flood, you need to kind of think about, well, how does, it sounds a bit obvious, but how does the water actually get into my building? Because then that maybe allows you to start thinking about defenses, and we'll talk about flood defenses in a minute. But water can get in from a river flood or an overland flood in many ways. So through masonry and joints in the masonry, cracking the external wall, cracking in the foundation, all vents for services, so water can get in through air vents. It can get in around the space for windows, cracks in doors, door frames, door jambs. Obviously, this is passed through floors and walls again, so there's gaps introduced through surface penetrations where water can get through. And I talked about sewer backup, so again, we can back up through appliances that are connected to the sanitary sewer system. Okay, so we kind of talked about what can happen and what you need to think about. So, you know, as we talked about earlier, it's vital to be fully prepared for a major flood event. And, you know, preparations have to be made well ahead of time, not at the time when the waters are rising. So we talked about establishing and maintaining emergency contact information, including for all staff, volunteers, plus key vendors and service providers. Again, but wherever possible, arrange collection so that you keep the most valued pieces high and dry, locating these items on upper floor well above the anticipated flood level as determined by your flood risk assessment. So again, try to avoid keeping the good stuff in the basement, right? Appreciate always possible or always deemed necessary. So you should, as a minimum, identify the most critical pieces in your collection and get an itemized snatch list, which identifies objects that would need to be moved to safety as the need arises. You know, this would be in a flood event, but it could be in any event, actually. Consider a storm drain video inspection program, which will identify potential blockages through root ingress and grease buildup, etc. And if your building is on a municipal or city sewer line and in an area prone to sewer backup, they should consider the installation, if they're not already provided and deployed, of backflow preventer valves. If your basement areas or elevator pits are vulnerable to water ingress, then and you may have sump pumps installed, ensure that the sump pump is fitted with a high water alarm, which is connected to your fire alarm panel. You can monitor that, and if possible, have the pump connected to a secondary power source, so if there's a power failure because of a violent storm, the sump pump can kick in. And also the topography, the ground, the flow of the ground around your facility. If the ground slopes towards your building, then you have a potential problem, particularly for land flooding. Okay. Again, if needed, then you could look to purchase temporary flood barriers and detachable vent covers. There's a growing market for this type of equipment, which can be deployed as needed. And there is a range of flood protection products available: vent covers, window covers, door covers. In the main cases, then you should consider creating permanent barriers and other kind of relief programs. But look, the most obvious, right? Just general good property maintenance. So examples of this would be checking your roof, checking your roof drains, checking your troughs, your downspouts, adequately guarded and free from debris and blockages that could otherwise back up and cause water to ingress into your facility. Make sure that the downspouts drain away from your premises and, you know, obviously, if possible, get into the system. Also, you should be aware of the location of any and all storm drains and catch basins that are in close proximity to your property. So kind of look at the picture on the bottom right of the slide, and where your local municipality and or highways department can become very helpful in terms of identifying where these are. Because once you've located them, you should be checking that they're regularly cleared and free from obstruction. Because if you think about the bottom right-hand corner, you know, that catch basin is designed for water to run off into, you know, either into a water course or a storm drain. But if it became blocked or, you know, with rubbish, you know, supermarket trolleys and grocery store trolleys and all the other bits and pieces you see in that could easily block a backup and cause a localized flood. So that's a very important piece that's sometimes overlooked. People know they're next to the river or the Bow River, but they're not necessarily looking at, you know, storm drains, catch basins and stuff like that. And to be honest, that's come back and bite you if you're aware. Okay. Thanks. So, about event, do listen to the local media, the radio in particular, because they'll give updated information on flood watches and warnings being issued, so you're ready to respond. Ahead of time to make sure that facility staff know how to turn power off if needed, electrical, gas, etc. We talked about having inventories of collections So this is probably the point in time you might want to be moving your highly prized items to an area that's not necessarily susceptible to flood if you can. Another thing you can do is actually put plugs in sinks, basins, baths, etc., and hold them down or weigh these down with sandbags, which will be of preventing backflow from the sanitary sewer system if you don't have a backflow valve installed on your sanitary sewer line. If you have pre-flood defences, this is the time to deploy them. Make sure those doors are closed, fastened, and locked. And the important thing is to stay safe, right? Property can be replaced, people's lives can't, so stay safe. And really until the event has stopped, the event is over, to then come back and assess the put in risk assessment and deployed all the right defences, you won't have any damage. Right? And lastly, phrase and phase. So, you know, you need to first check that it's safe to enter your property, to watch out for hidden dangers, because the flood water is not clean. It's going to be black, brown, grey, dirty. You're not going to be able to see what's under the water, so there could be sharp objects. You don't know what's been washed into your building, so you need to be very careful. If you have suffered damage, then it's probably a good idea to contact your company and your insurance broker to let them know, because we obviously have professionals that we can deploy at a moment's notice to come to your aid. Entering flood water, then make sure you're wearing waterproof gloves, boots, face mask, you know, because of the type of water that you're going to be moving in. If you didn't isolate your electrical supply before the flood event, do not enter flood waters before you've had the service connected by an electrical contractor. Don't be doing that yourself. Then wanting to remove water from the building, which is where the insurer and independent adjusters will help. So you're pumping water out, you know, mud, soot, that's mud and silt that's probably been washed into the building. You need to move that out of the building in combination with any build-up on the outside of a wall, so you're not undue pressure on the structure. And then you're looking at drying operations in terms of tree drying or deployment of blowers and dehumidifiers. So yeah, you're going to undertake a post-flood damage assessment. You commence salvage and drying operations. You know, you'll prepare a detailed inventory of all damaged or destroyed property. That's why it's so important to have good photographic records of what you had before. And it's a video or photograph damages at time. And that's kind of the best practices in terms of flood prevention.
Perfect. Time we will move to Excel's presentation. I have Farzina Khalidon from Excel to do the presentation. Now the floor is yours.
And thank you to our partners at Ecclesiastical for leading off today's discussion surrounding floods. Good afternoon and good morning to our attendees in Alberta and British Columbia. We appreciate you taking the time to participate in this very informative session. My name is Farzina Khalidon. I am the lead underwriter for Fine Arts BC in Canada for Excel Catlin. Floods are the most frequent type of disaster worldwide. It can strike anywhere and anytime. Although floods can be predicted, they often cause massive damage and destruction of property, as urban communities are located near water sources such as coasts and rivers. These are to be one of the most common hazards. Flood effects can be local, impacting a neighborhood, community, or very large, affecting entire basins and multiple provinces. Go over the definition of flood. This includes overflow of inland or tidal waters, unusual or rapid accumulation or runoff of surface waters from any source, mud flow, or loss of subsidence of land along the shore of a lake or similar body of water as a result of erosion or undermining caused by waves or currents of water exceeding anticipated cyclical levels. As previously mentioned by Ecclesiastical, there are various types of flooding: sewer hookup, overland, coastal, and river. Some of the concerns we have on the fine art underwriting side is with items in storage. And as we all know, of our clients who are avid art collectors want to increase those collections, and unfortunately, your home isn't usually big enough to house everything that you have in your collection, and therefore we resort to storage warehouses. And the challenge with the storage warehouses is that we accumulate too much costly artwork in a single location, which exposes them to big losses if the facility floods or catches fire. As an example, if we reference Superstorm Sandy, which I'll talk about in detail later on, many of the very common storage facilities, fine art specific, in the New York City area were affected as a result of Superstorm Sandy. For example, UO, Crozier Fine Arts, Christie's Fine Storage, and there are many more. Is with smaller facilities, specifically museums or galleries, where the facility itself is not large enough to house all of their inventory in one building. And as a result, either cram it all in, or we are again in a situation where the storage warehouse is the option. And basements are a very popular spot for storing items. If we reference the Calgary or Alberta floods, there were many clients that I can remember from my previous days at various insurance carriers where clients, their basement renovated, they were walkout basements, that's where art was, and ultimately the art was destroyed. Hurricane Sandy, one of the events for 2012. For days, the hurricane, which is always being remembered as Superstorm Sandy, onto the Caribbean and U.S. East Coast, punishing rain, wind, and waves. Lost in the Chelsea district of New York City, a combination of physical damage to the galleries themselves as well as art losses. If you have ever frequented to New York City, and if you visited a gallery, you likely would have been walking through Chelsea. One of the challenges when this storm happened was the inability to communicate with customers on the insurer side. It was very limited. It was challenging due to power outages. As well, transportation options were very limited due to, and adults as well were without a sufficient amount of art restorers. Photos, just to keep things interesting. On the left side, we have a rack full of damaged canvases and drywall from a local New York gallery. The second photo is basically happened after the storm hit, so paintings in a gallery. And sadly, this was one of thousands of galleries that were affected as a result of the storm. On the left side, this is the, after Sandy or the Sandy aftermath, and clip is beginning, and we're, washing away the water, and as you can see, some canvases on the side there that, I'm not sure if they were damaged or not, but this is what was happening after the storm hit. And on the right side, we have an art store or someone who is skilled in, trying to salvage what they can with this painting. To give you an idea of the Chelsea area in New York, this is essentially their flood hazard areas. And you'll see that the bulk of the area is very high risk for flood. On the side, this is a photo of it's a facility which formerly housed the Chelsea Art Museum. The yellow tape marks the height of the water from Hurricane Sandy on the building, which has now dried up, but you can get a visual for how much of an impact the storm had. Moving to the Alberta floods in 2015, it was the most destructive in the history of the province, and insurable damages exceeded or were approximately 1.7 billion Canadian. We galleries that were soaked with students filled up with water, and displays, whether indoor or outdoor, that were also damaged. The affected areas as a result of that flood were along the Bow River, Elbow River, Highwoods, Deer, Sheep, Little Bow, and South Saskatchewan rivers. It was the costliest disaster in Canadian history. And visual effects. The left side is a library in Calgary, and these are damaged books as a result of the flood. The right side is a flooded basement at a local contemporary art facility. So just back to the discussion on basements and why using them to store your most valuable possessions is not a good idea, and this is why. And again, just to give you an idea about what the flood hazard areas look like, the left side is Calgary, or the city of Calgary, and where you see the dark red coloring is it's all flood, and it's not even the flood fringe, it's the floodway. The right side is the city of High River, which, as you know, before the Calgary floods hit, High River had their moment of destruction, and pretty much the whole city is considered a floodway. So we affected as an industry from point or dollars lost between 200 million US to 300 million for our losses after Sandy, which is, I mean, this is a US, it's a stat, but can just compared to what we Canada, and although our concentration isn't near what New York has, it's still something that we can relate to. Impact of Sandy, there are insurers that actually won't insure any art that is kept in any of the Chelsea galleries. The total loss from Sandy is a moving target. Some of the works initially believed to be restorable could not be saved. For example, a customer had a painting that was insured for $13 million US that was damaged. Restoration, the insurer thought the value would go down to $5 million, however, deemed a total loss. As a result of Sandy, insurers are discouraging galleries from using subterranean spaces for storage. Exclusions are kicking in, where in flood-specific areas, higher deductibles are being assigned, or special deductibles for flood, and premiums. Some insurers were even adding clauses stating that galleries must keep art 4 feet off of the ground. After ongoing flood events that we are experiencing as an industry, we all need to take a more proactive approach. With flapping and awareness of flood zones and the good and the bad areas, Google at our fingertips. Use the internet. Familiarize yourself with where your facility is situated, and just be conscious of worst case scenarios. When you're preparing for a possible storm coming your way, keep in mind when you're moving items around, that's typically when they get damaged. A lot of customers like to display their art outdoors. For removing these pieces from the outside, whatever you can wrap and secure the items as well. Keep in mind what your, for example, top 20 most valuable items are. Those are probably the ones that you want to focus on first. Utilize the space that your gallery has. Galleries have tall ceilings. Take advantage of that. Keep in as well, flooding is also caused by pipes exploding. will be hazardous to works of art in many forms. Whether from excessive humidity or an accidental pipe burst, the presence of water has proven to be very damaging to all artworks, especially photographs. Consult with the risk manager. Consult with the risk manager. Also have a disaster plan or prepare one for this type of emergency. An acceptable plan includes specific procedures for getting art and property to safety. Train your staff. Emergency supplies such as fans, mops, brooms, storage bins that are on wheels, gas power generators. Keep on the list of contact numbers for your security alarm services, your utility companies, and most importantly, your insurance broker. Work you basically a guide to protecting fine art from natural disaster. We will share that via email through our partners at Marsh after today's presentation. Disaster happens. Call your broker and representative at the insurance company for some guidance. Provide as much information to them that will ultimately help the adjuster. Manage items as quickly as possible. 4, have a conservator on standby. Have the items assessed and triaged. Keep an inventory. And with an inventory, as previously stated, make sure there is more than one copy. Have with your broker. The other staff should have copies. Basically, someone be able to produce at the time of the loss. You work very closely with your broker. Please not hesitate to contact us should you have any questions. The questions don't have to be specific on today's topic. We are happy to help and go to the best of our ability. And if you have any ideas for future webinars and or topics that you're interested in hearing about, please let us know. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we will open the webinar for any questions that attendees might have.
So at this time, we would like to take questions. As a reminder, you may ask a question through your web console. Locate the Q&A panel on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Type your question in the open area and click Send to submit. If you'd like to ask a question over the phone, please press star then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. And to withdraw your question, press the pound key. One question over the web. Next, ma'am.
Okay. Let me see if I can see it. Okay. So, question from Jean-Luc is, are you excluding tsunamis here?
So that would be a reference. A tsunami would be as a result of an earthquake, but unless it's still considered an insured loss. Right? So no, we wouldn't be excluding tsunami. Obviously, tsunami is only really relevant if you're in from a perspective, I guess if you're in lower mainland of British Columbia area on the island of Ireland. Again, it's the St. Lawrence Fault, but you know that's close to a river. It's not really close to a larger body of water. But yes, tsunami would be deemed to be a natural catastrophe, and provided you've purchased coverage, then it would be included. Jane.
Yeah, it should be, and see a lot of although the risk management steps for flood respond the same way both for fine art and property.
Yep. The next question we have from Jennifer, does the panel have any specific suggestions for historic sites?
Okay.
We'll throw this to Ecclesiastical.
Yeah.
That's their baby, is historical sites.
Yes. As previously mentioned, obviously, a lot of, all major towns, cities are constructed around a ready supply of water, so no surprise that you have population density around water sources. So we have specific sections for historic sites. I think there are things to bear in mind. I mean, we talked about conducting a risk assessment. To be honest, buildings, particularly more traditional constructed buildings, which are stone or brick with, brick, stone, drywall, they actually perform better in a flood scenario, particularly if they've got tiled floors, that kind of situation. Some guidance that we can circulate tomorrow after the event I can share, because it's terrible. It's UK, I guess it is a bit UK centric because it's about historic, but it's about protection and historical buildings, so it does kind of cover some of what we've talked about. Into specific suggestions, it goes back to, whether or not you're in a flood zone, and really looking at what, if anything, done in terms of deployed defences, more permanent defences, but also aware of things like pits, storm drains, basins, and stuff like that.
Well, and Colin, also, if it's a designated property, do you want to touch on that?
Well, designated heritage, then obviously you have to be mindful of any changes that may not be allowed in terms of the historic designation. So with defences, they're not permanent, so that's actually a good way of protecting local buildings. So you can get flood fences that slot into door jambs, window frames, etc. There's one size fits all, but an important consideration. And so when you have historic buildings, you have to obviously be mindful of how you're going to go about drying them out and restoring them. But what I would call traditional constructed buildings, bricks, stone, they are a lot better to flood modern buildings with, insulation, drywall. Drywall's faster because of mold, right? So I guess buildings a few hundred years, they might get flooded every now and again. Around on that.
Perfect. And it will be kind of an answer to Kristen, will the PowerPoint be sent to webinar participants? Absolutely. We'll send that to everybody via email, as goes with the information and the brochure from Sal Catlin. Does it have any other questions?
Reminder, in order to ask a question over the phone, please star then the number 1 on your telephone keypad. Question over the phone, ma'am. Please continue.
Okay, so I guess there's no other questions online or on the phone. Then we will end the session here. and thank everybody taking the time to attend the webinar, and for our speakers from Ecclesiastical Excel for presenting this webinar. If there is any questions, when I send out the webinar, you can follow up with some questions via email, and we will answer them for you. And we'll hope to see you guys all again for our next webinar, which we hope to have later on in the year. Great day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. This concludes today's web conference. You may now disconnect.